If you take women who have an unwanted pregnancy and then have an abortion, and you compare them with women with an unwanted pregnancy who keep the baby, the mental health is actually significantly worse for the women who have an abortion.
Tax system, for example, is not very forgiving for mothers who choose to stay home for a while and take care of their children. But we do get rewarded the earlier we return to work after pregnancy. So the way that society is structured around women puts us on a path to believe that we are only successful if we tick all these career boxes.
I think part of looking after your family is succeeding in your job. So there's always going to be a balance. This is not about controlling women. This is not about religion. This is just about human equality and who counts. And I think if we look at the scientific consensus, then we have to accept it, whether that makes us popular or not. And so I'd encourage people listening to do the same.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Here I have two guests today. I'm not used to that. One at a time. I like two or three even. Three is fun. It's challenging, and it's interesting to get the same question from different people in real time like that, you know. So I like it. And today my guests are from the UK. I don't know. I'm blessed to have people who talk to me from all over the world. I'm very grateful. And today we're going to talk about ethics. We're going to talk about ethics. We're going to talk about the sticky subject of abortion and pro-choice and pro-life. And I think maybe you guys can introduce yourselves and tell us what else we might talk about, but also tell them what you're up to. And then I'll get started asking you some questions. So maybe Lois, you can go first.
Sure. Yeah. Well, thanks for having us on, Tammy. My name's Lois. I work for an organisation called Alliance Defending Freedom UK. So we are championing the rights of everybody to live and speak the truth. And as part of that, I've been looking specifically about how we can uphold the right to life in our culture and in our society and in our law. So at the moment, I've been looking particularly at the abortion law in the UK, looking for ways that we can change it for the better for women and children. And that's, but we'll get much more into that, I'm sure.
Thank you. And Callum?
Yeah, so I'm Calum Miller. I'm married to Lois, which is probably my biggest achievement. But other things I've done, I'm a medical doctor part-time, and I'm also a researcher at the University of Oxford, where my research is on the topic of abortion policy and all the things that come up in these debates. And so as someone who's pro-life, that's been sort of challenging, as you'd expect, as you've probably seen with other issues. But it's also been fascinating to see how there actually can be good arguments, good evidence in support of this view when it's often seen as a backwards, religious, superstitious thing. So I get the opportunity, I'm very privileged to get the opportunity to speak to wonderful people like yourself, and even more privileged to do so with my wife. So yeah, thank you for having us on, Tammy.
Oh, my pleasure. I wonder, Callum, if you could start. I looked briefly at your blog, and there was something that you wrote about an argument for pro-life that you were. Can you do a quick? I'm sure you know that argument, so maybe you could just tell the viewers that argument.
Sure. Well, so it's often seen as a debate about, when life begins, and it is a big part about that, but it's often seen as a religious thing and, a philosophical issue. You just stick to your position, I'll stick to mine, whatever. The way I like to think about it is an issue of human equality. So I grew up, and I still am pretty lefty in many ways. And so I was always into kind of, justice for the vulnerable and that kind of thing. And that's really shaped me for pretty much my whole life. And what was interesting to me was that people on the left with me seem to have a real concern for the vulnerable in many areas, and yet some of the most vulnerable innocent human beings, those in the womb, seem to be totally disregarded, dehumanized in a way that didn't quite make sense to me. And that's not to say the pro-life position is automatically correct, but it gave me a bit of uneasiness, I think. And so I began to think, well, what does human equality really mean? If we really believe in human equality like we say we do, it means that every human being has the same value and they have the same fundamental rights as any other human being. And that's the most basic part about a liberal democracy, is human equality, the same rights for everyone. And so then the question arises, well, who is included in that? When we say everyone, who exactly do we mean? Do we mean only men? Do we mean only white people? Do we mean only able-bodied people? And, we've come to learn, fortunately, that the answer is no, of course not. We mean every human being, because that's where our value comes from. And so I realized that the answer to this was really, well, what is that thing in the womb? Is it just a clump of cells? Is it a parasite? Is it another species? Is it just, a bit of matter? Or is it a human being? And for me, that was a scientific question. I was studying medicine in Oxford. When we studied embryology, it was very clear that a new individual human was formed at conception. And this wasn't something I came to from religion or from reading the Bible or anything. It was just a scientific fact. And therefore, I had to wrestle with the question of, well, if it is a human being, and if that's what biology says, then we have to say that it's equal just like anyone else. The other thing, I guess, that really struck me as I was in medical school, I was already kind of leaning and pretty solidly pro-life by this point, but I was struck by an experience where I was assisting with a cesarean section in New Zealand, of all places. It was an incredible experience. And we were doing a cesarean section on a woman who was having twin babies. And so at one point we had pulled out the first baby and the other baby was still inside. They were identical. We could see the baby inside. They were twins, same age, same development, same everything. And yet the law in New Zealand said that one of these babies is a human being with the same rights as any other person in New Zealand, except for maybe Australians. I don't know how they do that in New Zealand. And yet the law said that this baby, who was exactly the same in the womb, had no rights at all. And that was just striking, that it just made no sense from a legal or a philosophical or ethical point of view. And that solidified my view that this was something that, every human being is equal. That has to include human beings, no matter how small or undeveloped they are, and no matter how unpopular that makes us. And so I've chosen the path of unpopularity, which has been a good adventure. So, yeah.
So in what way has it, in what way have you seen this make you unpopular?
Oh, wow. It's in many ways. So I think probably everyone could list the abuse that they get on Twitter. I don't know if that's particularly distinctive. That's just
no, that probably isn't.
But we've seen how it changes my academic career and things like that. Being told by whistleblowers at academic journals. I've been told by someone at the top medical journal, or one of the top medical journals in the world, actually, that they will not publish anything that I write on any topic, just because they know I'm pro-life. They think I'd try and sneak that into anything, or just they don't like me. When I wrote a piece on abortion in Ethiopia, which said when Ethiopia legalized abortion about 15 to 20 years ago, it didn't actually stop women dying from unsafe backstreet abortions. It actually made the problem worse. And that's a whole other story. Now, this group of academic radicals and activists hounded the journal, trying to get my paper retracted. They did a big smear campaign and tried to get the paper retracted, not because of any scientific problems, but because of the conclusions. And the journal reviewed it a second time and said, no, the paper's fine, it's academically sound, it's worthy of being published. And so then they took it to the press and they wrote a hit piece in the National, one of the biggest newspapers in the UK, kind of smearing me as an activist and saying how my research had been discredited and that sort of thing. So, it comes in, there's light persecution, which is the odd comment on Twitter. Sometimes it really does affect our friendships, our careers, and we can only imagine just how much it has damaged the academic career of me and other people with my position. But we do know that that's the case. So it's been a challenging ride.
Very interesting, isn't it? When you step on a bee's nest like that, then you can see who wants to engage in that and who wants to run away from it, who's afraid of it, you see all kinds of things. When you think that the world is going along just fine, and then you step on a bee's nest and all of a sudden the world starts to divide and come together, but in different ways than you thought. Yeah, it's quite a thing to be in the middle of things. So were you Lois, were you also a liberal?
No.
Oh, okay. No,
I
you're conservative to the core.
I wish I had a cool story like Callum's, but well, I suppose I do have a cool story. I was raised by wonderful Christian parents who kind of soaked me in the teachings of the Bible.
Yeah.
So I was always very informed by my faith.
Can you share with me some of the experiences that you've had coming from your background and making you an advocate for life? How did
Yeah.
those one come from the other?
Yeah, I grew up in a very Christian family and was very informed by my faith from a young age, but didn't necessarily connect that early on to kind of the social justice issues of the day. It is a little different here in the UK rather than in North America, and the evangelical church, at least over here, is not quite so involved in these more thorny social issues, and is less kind of teaching on it, I'd say, inside the church body. So I don't think I had really made the connection until I went to university, and even later on I went to study my LLM in human rights law. And at that point, I actually decided to look into surrogacy, which was a kind of emerging issue in Europe at the time. And I was looking at surrogacy from the perspective of the rights of the child involved. And as I did that, I became more and more conscious of the question about where those rights began. Does a child have the right not to be sold? Yes, in international law, yes, definitely. And if that's the case, can that happen before birth? And can that child claim that right? And is there a protection for that child? And if there is, well, surely that child has even more fundamental rights to life. So that's kind of what drew me into this sphere. I've been very passionate about it. And I think since then, as I've met peers and women along the journey who have had experiences with abortion and hearing their stories, that has really given me a sense of the need to protect both lives in abortion. I think the debate has been very torn and framed in a way that we're told we kind of have to choose. We have to choose either to be pro-woman or pro-baby, and there's no kind of middle ground. And I think the ultimate pro-life position is neither of those, but in fact to say, let's find solutions and a philosophy that can actually protect and uphold both lives. So that's kind of how my journey took me to where I am today.
Mm-hmm. So that tells me that it's possible that the narrative around being a mother has been twisted, so that if you have a baby, then you don't have a life as a woman.
Yeah, that's
Right?
absolutely right. Yeah,
that's pretty. That's pretty one-sided. That's pretty one-sided.
That's
So
right.
I can see that there's a lot of need for conversation because of that. Right?
It's often treated like a death of your own life. You kind of
unbelievable. Yeah.
Women are kind of told they have to pick. Do you want to continue your own life?
It's a sort of death. It's a sacrifice. And
Right.
sacrifice is a sort of death because you have to give up something.
Mm-hmm.
So there's death involved in it. There's sacrifice involved in it. So
Certainly.
I think they're just they're too vague in their terms of what that means. It's more nuanced than that. And I think the nuance often is what's left out. I don't know what you guys have found, but it does sound like it's not very nuanced.
I think we kind of, especially since the sexual revolution, the 60s, the 70s, we have one one mainstream idea of what success looks like for a woman.
Yes.
And that typically demotes the place of a mother in society. So we're given accolades and trophies and applause for getting into boardrooms or for kind of being the boss babe, if you like. And of course, with the sexual revolution came in the pill, came in abortion, came all these factors that would kind of steer women away from motherhood. But little is done to respect, applaud, or value those women who actually would choose personally to find their fulfillment in families and children. I mean, in the UK, our tax system, for example, is not very forgiving for mothers who choose to stay home for a while and take care of their children. But we do get rewarded the earlier we return to work after pregnancy. So the way that society is structured around women puts us on a path to believe that we are only successful if we tick all these career boxes. And for some women, that's great. For some women, they love their career, but for many women, they don't have careers, they have jobs. And there's no space for them right now in the narrative to be valued and upheld as women and mothers. And I think that the abortion discourse where it is today has really suffered from that loss, and women have suffered from that loss.
Now, when the birth control first came in the 60s, is that when abortion also began? Because I know that when the birth control became legal, then there was more promiscuity. So then there were more unwanted births, I imagine. And so then they had to do something about that. Is that when abortion started to be more accepted in our societies as well? Do you know?
To a degree, yeah. So it started with the communists in Eastern Europe and the Soviet Union. So they first legalized it in 1920 in the USSR, and then in the 50s in most of the Soviet bloc in Eastern Europe. It was similar, it wasn't because of contraception, but there was a similar common theme, which is that it's about family planning, birth control, sexual liberation, and so on. And also a strong element of we need women in the workplace, so they shouldn't have babies. And so we need to stop them and sort of destroy their biology so that they can be laborers. And so the communists kind of got there first, and then China was, I think, late 40s, maybe early 50s. But it is true that in the Western world, other than Scandinavia, where it was 1930s and 40s as well, in the UK, we legalized it in 1967. The US states started to do so in the late 1960s, early 1970s, and 73 was Roe v. Wade. Canada, I think, was maybe late 70s. I don't remember exactly when the Supreme Court struck down every abortion law in Canada and just made it a free-for-all. But it certainly was very closely connected to the sexual revolution and this idea that sex and pregnancy or sex and babies have nothing to do with each other. Why would anyone think that one leads to the other? They should be totally free. And of course, what we've learned over the last 50 years is that you can never fully extricate them. They're always inherently linked. Sex is powerful precisely because it generates life. So even when you take away the life at the end, it still has that emotional power, that relational power, and still has incredible power to make or break people. And we've seen that, so many times in the celebrity world over the last few years. So sex is important. And the reason for that is because it was, from the very beginning, hundreds of thousands of years ago, it was connected to the creation of life. And therefore, in a sense, it's what society is built upon.
I think that makes me think about the trans problem that we have now, and that when we got the birth control pill, then it meant that homosexual relationships and heterosexual relationships could be very similar, because you wouldn't have to you could have sex and not have any children. And so then it was, well, then do you have to be a man and a woman? And then who's the man and who's the woman? Because if you're both, neither of you are having kids or have to have kids, neither of you have to have kids. And if both of you have access to the workplace, then who's the man and who's the woman? And maybe it doesn't matter. We go down these pathways and we just have no idea what we're playing with, right? Mm-hmm. It's just so weird that we've come to where it's so weird that we've come here, but it actually makes sense where we are because of the decisions that we've made. Yeah.
That's right. I think we lost track of what a woman is many, many years before the trans debate came to the fore. I think.
Right. Yeah, it was coming, wasn't it? This
That's
whole
right.
question, it was just coming.
Mm-hmm. Certainly peaked during that sexual revolution, kind of being the ultimate shaking off of women and men being distinctly different and celebrating that.
Yeah.
And then the sexual revolution told us that, well, women are equal to men, kind of anything we can do, anything they can do, we can do better, and we're just the same. And it ended up that we just ended up doing everything, which didn't ultimately make women happy. If you look at studies out of Yale over the last 5 decades, you actually see that women's happiness, although initially it was higher than men, I think in the 50s and 60s, has declined in relative and absolute terms. So what we've done by liberating so-called women is actually kind of just diminishing women, and that's not made us happy at all.
Yeah, well, if we take on jobs, desires really, dreams and visions that are male, then we're not fulfilling any of our feminine dreams and desires and visions. That's not going to make us happy. You know, the Hungarians, you probably know the Hungarian family policy that they've had in for over 10 years now. And that has diminished the abortion rate. It's diminished the divorce rate with no compulsion. And now women who have children, they have a tax break. They have a tax break for having kids. The one thing that I'm not certain about, I think that a lot of those kids end up in daycare because they really want women to go back to work. And women actually want to go back to work because they make more money, because their income tax goes down for the rest of their lives. So they are getting women back in the workforce, but now kids are being institutionalized. So, it's not perfect. It's not perfect. They were trying to change things. They did change things, but there's still work to be done, I guess is what you could say. But I certainly am thankful to them that they have done this, because now we know, we have data. We have data that you can bring down the abortion rate without making it law. You can change the system to work better for couples. If you get married before you're 25 in Hungary, you don't pay any income tax. That way you can, right? So if you get married young and have babies, you don't pay any income tax. So you make more money. So it gives you just a little more chance to survive and to prosper. So they've been thoughtful,
I think they've been very clever by having all these very attractive policies and then having a language that is impossible to learn, so that no one wants to go and take advantage of it, because none of us can get anywhere close to speaking it. But it's true that they're the only people even really trying, for the most part, that see that this is a huge population problem. And the whole Western world is reliant on immigration. And, going back to my lefty roots, I'm pretty pro-immigration, certainly way more pro-immigration than most conservatives. And yet it's just not a long-term solution, not least because all the other countries are going to run out of people as well. The fertility rate all across the world is absolutely plummeting. And soon, in 20 years' time, there won't be anyone who wants to immigrate to the West. And so what we will see is huge economic devastation, empty classrooms, teachers out of jobs. I saw a statistic the other day that there are 2 million, don't quote me, but I think it was 2 million Chinese teachers out of jobs because they have so few children. 2 million teachers unemployed. Wow. It's really phenomenal to see. And as you say, Hungary has been really leading the charge on this. And I think what they've done by reducing the abortion rate is showing that this is not something that most women want in itself. Abortion is not something that people desire for its own end. It's really seen as the only choice they feel that they have, because they stand to lose so much by having a baby. And so I think when we can map out a path that says women can succeed in not just their career, because that's not the only other important thing, but they can succeed in their friendships, in their relationships, in their career, their dreams, and have a family. I think that's ultimately what most people want. Most people still want kids. They still like kids. And so if we can create a society that lays the foundation for that, then as you say, the law makes a difference, but it's certainly not the only tool for reducing the abortion rate.
When I was a young mom, I stayed home with my kids, and the way I met other people, because I didn't know anybody where we were when we had little kids. I met other mothers, really. I met other mothers. So through their children, it was really because it was the children that played together. And then, so it was the mothers who were with them. So I got to know the mothers. So that's how your community was built and can be built if you stay home. I know that I did a little bit of work having kids play in a play gym. And a lot of the people who came with their kids were nannies. I was surprised at how few mothers there were there. So even when I was having children, there were fewer mothers that were with their kids. And I imagine, I don't know, but I imagine now there are even fewer mothers, right, because all the mothers are working. I know a couple of young moms, and I really don't know that many, which is kind of sad. I should know lots of young moms right now. And most of them work. Most of them work. And And it's funny because I think if they had like the first child and the second child, maybe you learn that you miss your child more because you didn't really stay home with the first child. Then you have the next child. Well, maybe that was too much daycare. So then maybe don't send them quite so much. And then the third child, I hardly saw either of those two. Maybe this one I'll actually stay home for. So I think sometimes it takes, I know my sister, I think she had a nanny living in her home. So the kids were actually together and at home, but she was working away. It was only the third child where she was more at home from. And so it's tricky to learn, and you have to learn on the fly. It's really good to have these conversations that young women can hear, because staying home with your baby is challenging. It's super challenging. You don't have a lot of sleep, and you have to learn what all these cries mean. So you have to be at their beck and call. And when your husband gets home, you are so tired that you have and you're sick and tired of being close with someone. So the last thing you want to do is have a hug from your husband, and he comes home and he wants some attention. It's like, yeah, no, baby, so, there's all this stuff that you learn when you're young, but it's a sacrifice. And the thing is, with every sacrifice you make, the bounty that you receive, and it's not always the kind of bounty that you think you're going to receive, but you receive all this love and attention. It's overwhelming, the amount of attention you receive, because your kids are just, they're there looking at you for everything. And so you think it's good. Women say they're lonely, but lonely for what exactly? Maybe lonely for an adult conversation, but you're not lonely for touch. Like, definitely not. So it's all of a sudden it's a different life, right? It's here you were, this independent young woman, and now you're at home doing laundry and having cuddles. It's a completely different kind of life. And nobody knows that. My sister, when I got pregnant and I was youngest in my family, she said, now this is called the family club, and you don't know it exists until you have a baby. And once you become part of that family club, other people on the street, they kind of nod at you like, yeah, you're a family. I have a family too, and it's but it's like an inside joke that you are part of now, that you understand as you take your pram down the street, and before that, you never even knew it was there. You never even noticed. So I don't know. I always wanted to have a baby. I wasn't always certain I wanted a husband. I was trained in feminism. I knew that I wanted to be an independent woman. I was going to have a baby, but I was definitely not going to have a husband. By the time I got to be maybe 22, I'd figured out that it was going to be kind of tricky. Just being a baby. That I probably, how was I going to pay for the truck? Right? How was I going to travel around the country if I didn't have any help? And, so I finally grew up a little bit, at least. I didn't think that I had everything figured out by then. But, my brain was only just getting formed by the time I was 22 or 23. Right? So you've got to give me a break on that. Let's see.
I think sorry, go on.
Well, I'm curious, you have research on the impact of abortion on women's mental health and its correlation with maternal mortality. I don't know anything about that.
Yeah, well, it's an issue, as I said, the academic space, as you and your husband know better than anyone, is deeply corrupted in many ways. And so it's not always easy to find some of this evidence and to get a reasonable debate, which is all we really want. What we've found, I've done a lot of research on both of those things with the mental health. We see that if you take women who have an unwanted pregnancy and then have an abortion, and you compare them with women with an unwanted pregnancy who keep the baby, the mental health is actually significantly worse for the women who have an abortion. And that's still the case. People say, well, those women were different to begin with. They had different mental health backgrounds, different social economic statuses, etc. And the research has actually taken that into account. And it finds even when you compare like for like women, the women who have abortions have a 30% increased risk of anxiety, a 70% increased risk of suicidal behavior, a 130% increased risk of alcohol abuse, and a 300% increase in drug abuse. And so one of the main researchers who found this, he was a New Zealand researcher called David Ferguson. He was pro-choice. He said, this is a woman's choice. It should be legal, but we have to be honest about the scientific evidence. And he said at the current time, there is no credible scientific evidence that abortion has mental health benefits. In fact, it was the opposite. Now, although, I disagree with him on the issue, he was actually a real man of integrity, because he was asked by the New Zealand government's abortion committee to not publish his research in case pro-lifers found out about it. And because he was a good man, he published the research, and then he went to the press and said what happened. He said, they tried to get me not to publish it, but this is science. You don't just refuse to publish things you don't like or that are inconvenient. And so his research is actually widely regarded by pretty much everyone in the field as the best quality research on this topic. And it shows those outcomes, which obviously are a significant harm, and all the more acute in a time when women's mental health and everyone's mental health is much more widely concerned, cared for and thought about. And so we have a huge mental health crisis across the Western world in particular. And I don't want to say that most of it is due to abortion, but a significant portion is. And I've seen the real life side of this. Women come into my clinic or hospital who tell me that this was the reason, that they feel suicidal, that they're on drugs. This is when it all started. And so that's one of the things that I worked on. The other was the maternal mortality side. And this is really mainly about the idea that, okay, suppose you don't like abortion. We can all agree that abortion is bad. We can all, maybe a lot of us can agree that abortion is even wrong and shouldn't happen. But we should make it legal, because if you ban it, then women will just get dangerous backstreet abortions. They'll all die, and there'll be thousands of women dying and so on from all these dangerous illegal abortions. And so typically the pro-life response has been to say, well, that might be the case, but it's still a fundamental violation of a fundamental human right. And so we have to protect the child, no matter the consequences. I took a slightly different approach, and I said, well, is that assumption actually true? If we look at the historical evidence, if we look at the empirical evidence from all across the world, is it true that when you ban abortion, women start dying more, and when you legalize abortion, women die less because of this? And what I found was the opposite, that in many cases it doesn't have any impact, and in some cases legalizing abortion has a negative impact, and you cause more women to die because more women have abortions, or because illegal abortionists feel less scared of the law because they know it's legal, they're going to get a lighter penalty, so they offer their shoddy services much more widely. There are many reasons. But what the example that struck me most was Poland. People say if America bans abortion, as many states have now done, there are going to be all these women dying. And that's really a conjecture, it's speculation. And we actually have examples that show us concretely what happens in a developed country when abortion is banned. Poland did this in 1993. They banned abortion for almost every reason except a tiny number of cases for rape, for disability, and so on. And what they found was that their maternal deaths shot right down. In fact, Poland now has the best maternal health record in the entire world. They have fewer maternal deaths than America, than France, Germany, UK. And that's despite, or we can say despite, banning abortion in 1993. They've actually done better than most other countries. And so there are many other examples which I won't bore you with, but I'd encourage people to take another look at the empirical evidence, because we really see that abortion is not just harmful to the baby, it also has really significant harms for women, including, sadly, sometimes even taking their lives.
Now, why do you think that is? Why do you think women, if it's illegal, then they choose to have their babies, and in the end they're happier because of it? Yes? Is that what you're saying? Is that what you're saying? Is the outcome of that?
Well, so a significant proportion of women, if they are not allowed to have an abortion, will have the baby. And the best example of this is, a lot of people say pro-life laws don't work. They're useless. They don't stop abortions. Well, again, the evidence clearly shows that to be false. And the best example is there was a very widely publicized study called the Turnaway study from the US from the last 10 to 15 years. And it studied exactly those women who went to get an abortion. They decided they wanted an abortion. And then they were turned away from the clinic and told, you're too far along in your pregnancy to have one, so you can't have one. You can go to another clinic, you can go out of state, you can go to Mexico, but you can't have an abortion at this clinic. Well, what they found was that 70% of those women ended up having the baby. 70%. So it prevented the large majority of abortions. And so the researchers said, okay, the laws do work, restrictions do work, but it will ruin their lives. And so they studied that.
Yeah.
And so they went to all the women who had the baby, and they kept going to them every 12 months. And at the child's 5th birthday, they asked the women, do you wish you could still have an abortion, or are you glad that you had the baby? And what they found was that 98% of women who had the baby were glad. And so what this shows to me as a doctor and a researcher is, it's not fundamentally about, women don't fundamentally need abortion. They need time and support and care. And when we give that, they are resilient to their experiences. They can do things. They're strong enough to make things happen, to succeed in their lives and to be happy. And it does show, I think, for me that this is not something that is going to ruin someone's life. It's scary, and we don't want to downplay how scary it is. You were saying before, it is a kind of death. It's a sacrifice, and we're not pretending that, you have the baby, everything is exactly the same. It's easy. There's no problems. We would never say that. But what we're saying is that when women do go through that transformative experience, and I'm not saying from experience of myself, I'm saying what they've said. It actually is a transformational experience, which women, having gone into it frightened, terrified, really worried about what their life is going to look like, when they look back 5 years later, the overwhelming majority say, wow, I'm glad I did it that way. So that's all I can say is what the empirical evidence shows, and that's what it shows.
Yeah, well, it's no wonder women won't. I mean, it's very difficult to have a baby. It's the women who die in childbirth historically go to the same graves that warriors go to. So it's a very difficult thing to do, but that doesn't mean it's not worthwhile doing, because it's difficult. Difficulty, that's the spice of life, isn't it? That's why we watch pirate movies and superhero movies and stuff, because we want to see people who are putting their life at risk. That's what we want to do in our lives. And when we're young and able, then we can fortify ourselves. It's not going to kill us. It's going to make us stronger. Right?
Absolutely.
That's what being a mother is. That's for sure. Let's
definitely devalued that kind of feminine strength, haven't we? We don't count that to be strength anymore. We don't talk about that when that kind of language. We talk about it as being a pause or being something that you do kind of outside of your life, and then you come back to your real life. But I think if we use more of that language in our daily life about feminine strength and in comparison to masculine strength, and not saying that women have to fit into that body of things, but they have their own things that they're able to do. The strength to get up at 3 a.m. when your baby's crying, for example. That's amazing. My sister just gave birth last week, and my goodness, I'm looking at her like, wow. And it is an incredible human ability that men don't have, and it is unique to us, and it should be celebrated and not downplayed.
That's for sure. Absolutely. Jordan always said he was amazed that he would hear Michaela peep and I would be down the stairs and he wouldn't even really wake up. But for me, that was the call to duty. That was the call to duty, and there's nothing like it. Really, there's nothing like it. So,
well, I think it's also often downplayed. We think of the men's jobs as the more important, and of course, in the modern world, men and women can do almost all the same jobs, even though not always exactly the same. And I think men can't even create something that outlasts themselves. They can't create a new life. Like they cannot do anything beyond this lifetime in any significant way. They can build stuff, but it will probably get destroyed. They can write things, it will probably get lost to history. It's women that actually uniquely have the power to bring in, not just the next generation, but the one after that and the one after that and the one after that. And I think to suggest that this is just some, biological accident or some, biological quirk, I think is really demeaning. I think this is something far more profound, that women can, perpetuate humanity in a way that men can't. And I think there's really something profound about that.
Yeah, also too that the man, if he's going to go out and do the hard things that he has to do, why do them if he doesn't have a wife and a child at home that he is providing for? That is motivating. That's a motivation for men, and we've forgotten that was. It's not that men get to go out and work.
Right.
That's not the thing. It's the thing is that they're taking on the dragon, and they're going, they're going to get the treasure, and the treasure's at home with their babies and their wife.
That's right. And again, I don't want to harp on the research too much, but the research shows this, that there's a paper from the 90s by a Nobel Prize winning economist, and it's called Men Without Children. Mm-hmm. And what he showed was basically when abortion was legalized in the United States, there was a massive increase in men who then went into crime and went into drugs and were involved in violent crime and things like that. Now, we don't want to say, have a kid because otherwise you'll be a druggie or you'll be a violent criminal. But the reality is that, especially for many men, maybe on the margins of society, many men who don't have particularly great options career-wise, the one thing historically that has got them to just grow up and to take responsibility and to be good citizens is knowing that they have a wife and a kids to take care of. And again, it shouldn't take that for men to behave. They should behave regardless. But, it's an empirical reality for society that one of the things that makes humans grow up, especially men, because we're particularly immature, is having that kind of responsibility. And if we don't have that, then we're much more likely to go astray.
Well, I don't know, Lois. I don't think women grow up without children either. I don't think men do, and I don't think women do. I just don't think people grow up without having kids. What do you think?
I mean, you'll be much wiser on that, given that we don't have kids, so we may have not grown up yet. We may still be Peter Pans, but
I'm going to talk to you in a year and find out.
There you go. But I think, from what Callum's saying, I think it's just so clear that we are people made to be in that family unit. The kind of institutions of marriage and nuclear families, they're not just, a part of history that we can do away with because we now have newfound liberty and autonomy. Like we can choose not to be part of these institutions, but ultimately the data shows that it does help and support us to thrive both as men and women. I think it's been a major loss to society that we have just discarded these things so quickly, really, in the last 20, 30 years.
Yes, right. Hopefully it's a blip, but I know that when you see a decline in the population, I don't know that there's any data that says that you can turn that around. So, we better get to it.
Indeed.
Better get to it. Oh, so there's been changes to the abortion law in the UK?
Yes, well, upcoming. So we've had the same abortion law in the UK for 50 years, and it looks for many of us that would never change and it was set in stone. But recently, two options have been presented to our members of parliament that they will vote on next month in April. So currently, our law allows most abortions for almost any reason, to give or take, up to 24 weeks, which is actually an outlier in Europe. In the European Union, the average is about 12 to 15 week cap. But here in the UK, much more extreme, up to 24 weeks. And in certain circumstances, 3 to be precise. 1, if it's to save the life of the mother, if it's to prevent her from taking a physical or mental injury, or if the baby has any form of disability or fetal anomaly, then you can abort all the way up to birth in the UK. So already we have quite a liberal law. Yes. Now, the proposed changes are kind of the red pill or the blue pill, if you like. There's, on one hand, MPs can vote to decriminalise all abortion all the way up to birth. So this is quite a specific law. It would allow any woman to self-perform an abortion using pills on herself all the way up to birth. I should clarify that the abortion provider will not be able to do it past 24 weeks for her in most circumstances. So this would put the woman in a very dangerous position. Now, whether you are ideologically pro-choice, pro-life, or frankly don't care, this is an extremely dangerous situation for a woman to be self-performing abortions, giving birth, delivering these babies in their bathrooms, and going through that absolute trauma on their own potentially. I think that's absolutely horrendous for our country to even be considering this. Now, this is option A. Option B, on the other hand, has been presented to MPs, and it would actually lower the abortion cap in our country from 24 weeks down to 22. Now, this doesn't seem like a big change, but if you bear in mind that right now babies are able to survive outside the womb with medical support from 22 weeks, that's been proven in many circumstances. It is indeed barbaric that in a country like UK, you would have a hospital ward where on one hand a baby is being killed for almost any reason, on the other hand a child is being helped to survive, to fight for their lives at the very same age. So although this is a very small baby step, if you like, this is actually presents a great opportunity for the UK to bring their law into a more humanitarian direction. I think it's a really exciting and important step for women and for babies.
How is that voted on? Who votes on that kind of bill?
So this will be voted on by our members of parliament, our elected representatives. Both of these amendments, interestingly, were put into a criminal justice bill, and it wouldn't necessarily be a natural place that you would think that MPs would want to discuss abortion in. But initially, the decriminalisation amendment was kind of inserted in, rammed in to this piece of legislation, and so this bill kind of took on a new form to become a vehicle to discuss how we should modernise our abortion laws. According to polling in the UK, it's pretty clear that decriminalisation up to birth, or abortion up to birth, is not a good idea for most women. Most women, when they see the abortion cap at 24 weeks, say that it should be lowered to something more humane. And very, very few people, I think one poll showed even 1% of people in the UK would support abortion in any circumstance all the way up to birth. Most people would consider themselves not entirely pro-life, but not entirely pro-choice. We all think there should be some limits somewhere. And so this is an important conversation for the UK to be having, for members of our parliament to be having, to think again about this law, which has been in place for a long time, 50 years, and bringing it up to a more modern standard.
Well, that's in the right direction then, isn't it?
It's definitely in the right direction, yeah.
Okay, well, we can pray for that, that's for sure.
You.
So here's a question. From your point of view, what factors have contributed to a culture that has made life harder for women due to abortion?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting question. When abortion was campaigned for initially, and actually still today, when you hear abortion campaigners talk, they talk often about the slogan, "My body, my choice." And this kind of idea of ultimate autonomy, that once we have ultimate autonomy, even over the babies that we create, then we will be fully free. Unfortunately for many women, that freedom has never arrived, because what was once would have led to a circumstance where someone falls pregnant, perhaps unexpectedly, there would be an expectation that the man involved, in many circumstances, and I accept not all, but the man would typically say, okay, well then we get married, and this would be just kind of how life goes on. They would stay together, they would raise the baby together, because there would be an acceptance of responsibility in many cases. However, with the advent of abortion, men have now been able to say, well, your body, your choice, your issue. I'm out of here. This is all on you. And actually, although that's meant to be an empowering slogan, I think it's actually a really isolating slogan. It gives us the full weight of a responsibility that was always meant to be shared. And I think women have really suffered from not having that sense of community, of relationship, in those big decisions and in those responsibilities. And we know from, it was in the BBC in 2022 that they reported that almost 1 in 5 women who have abortions in the UK feel pressured into it. They would have chosen something different. that makes a lot of sense to me. I mean, you'd never hear about a little girl growing up saying, oh, I'd love to have an abortion. This is never an ideal circumstance for anyone. And yet we have more and more women choosing abortion. We have 200,000 in the UK everywhere, and I can only imagine how many in the US and Canada. And so there is something fundamentally wrong here. If this is something that many women don't want to go through, but our ideology and rhetoric has led us to a point where we feel like we don't have a choice, that it is all on us and we can't carry this responsibility forward ourselves, and something's gone majorly wrong for women. And I think we need to take a step back, have a think about what it means to be pro-women, what kind of this confused notion of feminism has done. If we can recenter our thoughts without that 50-year progression of that kind of obsession with autonomy, then we'll be able to serve women, men and children to a much better extent in society.
Mm-hmm. That's for sure. Well, it's probably a lack of community in one part, right? Because we used to have the church community. The church was the center of the town. Now that is fallen away. We don't have that. Then there was the nuclear family. Now that's fallen away. So if a woman becomes pregnant now, who does she look to make this decision? Well, does she look? I guess she looks to her doctor, and if her doctor, if it's legal and it's medically acceptable, then that's what they're going to suggest, because they have to tell you have right. You're the doctor. You have to tell them what the options are, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's not just the community in terms of making the decision, but also in the support afterwards. And as much as you can give tax breaks, you can give money, you can give your child to a stranger to look after for the day. Historically, because of the geographical proximity, you would be able to, and because families stayed together more, you would be able to leave your kids with someone you trusted, with their grandparents, or with your very close family friends, or with the other kids in the neighborhood or the village or whatever. And I think because the whole of society is so fractured, not only geographically, but also relationally, we have a very much consumerist idea of relationships where you sort of use them for as long as they're useful and then change if you find something better. I think because we have that sort of fractured society in general, it's so much more difficult. We don't have kids, but suppose we did. If we had a kid and we wanted to go out for the evening, in theory, if our parents lived close by, then we could leave the kid with our parents. Our parents would love the opportunity to look after the baby, and everyone would be happy. We could go out and we could have our lives and, do the best of both worlds. Whereas, my parents are divorced. They both live miles apart from me, because we live in, Lois lives in a different country from where she grew up, which is my fault. Mea culpa. It makes it so much harder. You can see why the average person who doesn't have that sort of relational capital nearby to them will say, well, if I have a child, what do I want to do if I want to go out for the evening? I have to pay $200 for a stranger to come and look after them. And you can see why that would make it so much more difficult and so much more convicting in a bad way for someone to have a child, because they just feel trapped by the lack of options and the lack of support they have.
When I was first married, we also lived far, thousands of miles away from our families. And we were the only people our age who had kids too. So we couldn't swap kids with other, which we did later. We would swap our kids with another parent who had kids, and they would go out. And then the next weekend we would take their kids and they would go out. And so we did it that way. But I didn't have a babysitter, I don't think, really, until my kids were 9 and 11 years old. But Jordan and I had dates at home. We put the kids to bed and we had a date at home, and that was fine. It was fine. It was just fine.
Yeah.
And besides, by then I was 31 and 32, 33. I'd seen a lot of the world by then. I'd seen downtown quite a few times. It was a different way of going out. It was a different way of going out. We were going out to the living room. Very far. Very far, but we didn't answer the phone. We didn't answer the door.
Yeah.
It was our time to be together. There was no interruptions. So
nice. That's a good tip.
Yeah, it was a really good tip. And it was something that Jordan insisted upon, because I had my daughter, and a few months into that, he was getting pretty lonely, and he told me he was getting lonely, and I told him I didn't really care. And, and then I said, well, if you're lonely, I said, I guess we could schedule dates. And he said, well, that didn't sound very spontaneous. And I said, well, I don't know. It worked for us when we were single. Maybe it could work again. So he thought, he trusted me enough. So he said, okay, let's try this. And he was, when's this going to happen? How many times a week is this going to happen? Where is this going to happen? Where are all the parameters? And so we set up all the parameters. You had to light candles, and you had to fluff the pillows, and you had to wear something nice. And, but then after a few years of doing that, we knew what we were doing. So then he'd say, do you want to have a date? And I'd say, no, I'm tired. And he'd say, how about tomorrow? Oh, I have a meeting. What about the next day? Yeah. Okay. So then, in 3 days, you're going to have and you're not going out. You're just going to go into the living room. But in 3 days, you are going to go into the living room, and you're going to be ready, and you're going to have a rest so that you're awake and not complaining because you didn't get enough sleep the night before, and have a little bit of time together where you can just dance and be together. And that saved our marriage. I think that practice of putting that time together. So even if you have nobody, you can do it, and it can be good, but you have to negotiate it. You have to say what you need, which is you have to be vulnerable and say what you want, and trust the other person that they'll listen and talk to you, and not just brush you off when you've admitted that you need something.
Yeah.
And so it's about trust and service, and service to one another. Yeah. So it's a workable situation, even if you're out in the country and all you have for babysitters are cows.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think that's really beautiful, Tammy. I think it's exciting to hear how marriages can support each other in that sense. I know also people might be listening and saying, well, what about single moms? How are they supposed to find this? And I empathize with that a lot. But what you were saying before about community is also true, that I think maybe family members and society and kind of close communities and church groups around have lost that art of rallying around a mum. Not probably consciously of this, but I suppose we have more of this philosophy of like, oh, well, it was her choice, or oh, well, it's kind of her responsibility now. So, we've kind of left that. And for a country or a culture that calls itself pro-choice, this is actually the opposite of pro-choice. It's not actually providing that different way to have a healthy relationship with your child and kind of continue to have a healthy lifestyle. And that's definitely to the detriment, and it's definitely an indictment on us in the West. At ADF, we came across, we've been involved recently in supporting pro-life charities who offer support services outside abortion facilities. We know at least one lady, Alina, who had found herself pregnant in a very difficult circumstance. She was single. She actually just lost her job. She was alone in a different country. She found that she had no option. Basically, she called the abortion provider and said, what are my options? And they said, well, we only offer abortion. And she went to the clinic, and someone put a leaflet in her hand just as she was going in, and it just talked about services available. It was financial support, but also practical support and social support. It was a community of women who were giving their time to be able to kind of have community groups, have toddler groups, baby groups, those kind of things. And because of that support available to her, she actually changed her mind and made a different choice. We know there's hundreds of women who have made that choice. Mm-hmm. Those support systems, those pro-life charities are so, so important to vulnerable women. But unfortunately in the UK and elsewhere, and I believe in Canada potentially, the government have created these buffer zones around clinics which criminalise those offers of help and criminalise even prayer, silent prayer within those zones. And I often approach that conversation from a free speech, freedom of thought perspective, because obviously it's horrendously censorial for a government to be deciding what people can say, but also from just a female perspective, from a pro-woman, pro-mother perspective. We really have to be finding these ways to be creating those communities and support networks and kind of makeshift families in our new era where so many people don't have those nuclear families to rely on. How can we be friends and family to women's needs? I think that's something that Christians and pro-lifers have to take on as well as the wider society.
Yeah, well, we definitely have to support one another. When a man and a woman are married, and if only the man is working, he's going to be gone a lot. He's going to be gone a lot. So that mother is, in a way, a single mother. The husband may come home at night, and then you give him dinner, and you have an hour with the kids, and then they go to bed. But you've been with them all day long on your own. And those mothers groups that you can find, if you can find people in your neighborhood, but also I used to go to the library with the kids, so then I found mothers there. You find you can. I used to find mothers where kids are going to be. Then mothers are there, and you just at the playground. You just at the playground and just talking to one another. And even if that's the only relationship you have, and it's at the playground, it's not isolating yourself at the playground, but saying hello to someone else, right?
Yeah.
So reaching out and making sure that the people who are there know that they're part of the community of the people that are there. It doesn't mean that you have to, you don't have to do it on a huge level. You can do it at a very basic level, this community and this belonging. And all of that, all of those little daily interactions, they'd make a huge difference to somebody who is alone. And then when she has a sick kid, she has someone that she knows. I took good care of little kids when I was at home because I had no green card. I was in the States and I couldn't work anyway. So I took care of some other kids, and I knew some other mothers. And one day, one of them, their nanny didn't show up. So she asked if her little boy could come over. And so she just dropped him off. There you go. There he was. Knew there was some place to go. And it was good. I loved it. It was good for my kids because then they had people to play with, and I didn't have to take them anywhere.
That's perfect.
Yeah, perfect. That's right. Perfect. Yeah. It's a sunny day, just enjoy my children. That was that. We moved back to Canada so my kids could go visit with their relatives, because then they could fly on airplanes when they were older without us. But when they were little, it was just Jordan and I. And so I had to learn to find my community. But it wasn't that hard. I think people are told it's scary and maybe told that it's not possible, but it is possible. It certainly is possible. It's nothing to be afraid of. And that way you teach your kids to be social. Right? You be social, your kids learn to be social. So it's a skill that they're going to need to know, and you have to model it. You have to model it. I mean, I don't know. I wasn't a single mother, so I don't know about that. I don't know about being a single mother. I wasn't a single mother. I had friends who were single mothers, so yeah, they did all right too.
Yeah. I think that's true. I mean, it's so challenging, of course. I can't even imagine how hard it must be sometimes, but I think we lack to also have those, we don't see single mothers on screen necessarily, or we don't kind of have these cultural influences and some pointers of women who are making it work in that regard. I think that could be harmful in a way. It doesn't, if we don't see people thriving, in this role, it does make it a lot more scary. So I think finding ways to support, empower, and kind of celebrate single mothers who are making things work despite difficulties, and just kind of celebrating in their victories too in a really public way could be helpful to those who find themselves in a very difficult situation.
I think you want to support everyone, but I think you also want to draw a good line about what the ideal is, and the ideal is a mother and a father. That's ideal. And if you're not going to have a mother and a father, then a single mother has to have a man or two who are in that child's life regularly and reliably, and it's up to them to have that kind of psychological wellness, I think, to have that happen, and that social adeptness to have that happen too. And that's usually uncles, though, isn't it? That's
right.
That's what it used to be. It would be uncles and grandmothers and grandfathers, and those are the men in the life. Even if, say, the husband was absent, then you would still have these other. But now everybody moves away
Yeah.
from their families. So then you have to create those
Yeah.
families again. And I also used to tell people when I was older that would come from other countries that you have to make the family where you come to. You may have left your family, but I learned that if you make your family where you are, then somehow that family that you left it enriches it as well somehow. Just living with that loving attitude with people right around you, it calls to your family, kind of. It calls
Right.
you a love for your family. It calls it out, kind of. That's what I found. I had one of my friends' moms had a heart attack, so a grandmother had a heart attack, and my grandmother had a heart attack, but she was 3,000 miles away. So I took flowers to my friend's grandmother, and that was good. It was good. I needed to give flowers to a grandmother. I couldn't give it to my grandmother, so I gave flowers to somebody else's grandmother, but it had the same. It was still good. It was still good and real. It just wasn't my grandmother, but that didn't matter either. So you make family where you are.
Yeah.
You have to. You have to, for your sake and for the sake of your children when you're single. But you have to realize that you've made a compromise because you don't have a husband. You've compromised, so now you're going to have to work doubly hard to and that's the choice.
Yeah.
That's the choice. That's the life you have.
Well,
That's destiny.
I think part of the issue is that conservatives or traditional people, come across as being moralizing or judgmental about single mothers. And, there are many reasons for single motherhood. Sometimes it is bad decisions. Sometimes it's, they're absolutely the victim of an irresponsible man and they've done everything right.
Or he dies.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
Well, that as well. And I think when we say that having a mother and a father is best for a child and that having one parent is less good, it's not because we're moralizing, it's because we're actually saying you're doing the job of two people and you shouldn't be forced to do that. We think you're taking on a burden that is too much, and there's a good chance it's not your fault, and we think that that's not just bad for the child but bad for you because you deserve the support, you deserve to have someone else doing this job for two people. And so I think a lot of this conversation also kind of recalls the need for a good conversation about fatherhood, because I think often when we shift the focus on abortion from the baby to the mother, we just think, okay, we just need to reconceive motherhood and then we'll be sorted. But I think part of the reason we have a bad conception of motherhood is because we have a bad conception of fatherhood, because we've told men it's okay to just leave your family, go to work, focus on your work, make that your number one priority, and then family is the second most important thing. And so naturally, in a world where people want equality and women want equality, they're going to see that attitude and say, well, why shouldn't the career be the number one thing for us and the family should be second best? And so I think what we really need to emphasize is that this isn't just about supporting mothers and reconceiving of motherhood. It's also about saying for men, the family has to be the most important thing for you, after faith maybe, but in worldly terms, the family has to be your number one priority. If you succeed in your career but you fail your family, then all your career achievements are worthless. And it is your family that you have your number one duty to, and you have to be a good and present father. And I think if men really begin to model that well, and if we can show that our number one priority as men is the family, looking after them, caring for them, I think it will make a lot more sense to people that for mothers, they should have the same priorities as well. And, no one should be putting their career above their family, whether men or women. I think we all have to show that that's, where the priorities are.
What about if a man prioritizes his family but fails at his job? Is he actually going to be putting his family first?
I think part of looking after your family is succeeding in your job. So there's always going to be a balance,
Right? Yeah.
And I think this is part of one of the things, I came to understand the wisdom of Christianity later in life than many Christians. But I think one of the real pearls of wisdom in the Bible is this idea of idolatry, which is that God created a good world with a load of good things. Work is good, family is good, relationships are good, sex is good, material things are good, money is good, all these things. But any of them, no matter how good they are, any of them can be an idol. Even if it's the best thing that God created, if you make that your number one thing above God and you put your self-worth in it and you define yourself by it, then it's an idol and it's wrong. Right. And I think there's a trend among traditional people, conservatives, including religious ones, but I guess maybe even more so non-religious ones perhaps. There's a tendency to say the family is really good and it's been undervalued, and therefore we need to focus on it and put it number one. And they do it, they sort of overcompensate, and actually they idolize the family, and they say if you don't have a family, you know, and so all that to say, I think what your point comes down to is that men can idolize their family. They can, you know, prioritize their family to such a degree that they neglect their family ultimately because they're not doing their work. And so I think ultimately it's all about having the right balance of worth, of effort, of love. And this is what, you know, St. Augustine said many years ago, that sin really is disordered loves. It's not about loving the wrong things necessarily, although it can be. It's not about not loving enough. It's about loving things more than you should or less than you should, and loving anything more than God. And I think once we get those in balance, that is what actually lets us love everyone, including our family, better.
No, good point. I like that. That was
it's not mine.
But it was a good point, wasn't it? Yeah. Pro-nationalist policies. As research and advocates, what types of pro-natalist policies and measures do you believe would be most effectively support adults to thrive as parents? Pro-natalist policies. So that is pro-life. Yes? Is that what that means? Pro-natalist.
Essentially supporting raising the birth rate. So supporting the creation of more people, which can be aligned with the pro-life view, but you could be a pro-natalist and not necessarily be against abortion. Would that be accurate?
Yeah, I think you could be pro-natalist and think we need to improve the birth rate, but think that abortion is okay as long as there are enough pregnancies. You can abort some, and you know.
So there's not necessarily that moral kind of look at the value of the child as, you know, as a child for its own sake, which is probably. Yeah, but there's a lot of alignment. So
it's typically more an instrumental thing that you want to increase the birth rate for economic reasons or that kind of thing, rather than, you know, the pro-life position is fundamentally rooted in human rights. It's that the child has a right to life, it cannot be violated. And the pro-natalist policy can be based on valuing children, but it's not based on that deep sense of human rights, I think.
It might be economic as well.
It might be economic, yeah, exactly.
Right. I see. And so... So are there pro-natalist conversations then that happen in Parliament, or are they pro-life conversations that happen?
I would say the balance of our culture would be more pro-natalist at the moment in terms of the conversations that are happening. I don't know, there's several reasons for that. Maybe in one sense it's more politically expedient. Maybe it seems a little bit too moral to have a pro-life opinion, but if you're just trying to increase the birth rate for economic reasons, maybe that's a bit more palatable for people.
Yeah, right.
But also, I mean, there is a dire need to increase the birth rate. Like our country is certainly running out of people. In my area of Scotland, our birth rate is something like 1.2.
1.2. Oh wow.
I know. So there's certainly a space for that, and there's some wonderful MPs who have championed causes to help and support mothers to take that plunge of motherhood before they turn 30. I think it was just last year. I don't know if it was in the UK or further afield, but it was the first time that 50% of women reach their 30th birthday without having a child. And there's great demographers like Stephen Shaw who have been studying this all over the world, who see that this trend, firstly, has a terrible social consequence when it comes to having enough people just to run the country, basically, to enable all the care services we need for our aging population, to be able to sustain life for the upcoming generation. So it has an economic impact. obviously, as well, but also a social impact in that we're the loneliest generation of all time. There's more single adult households in the UK than there has ever been before. And so there's a clear social need to be, for the sake of the parents, to encourage them to have children, because there's a cohort, and Stephen Shaw has some great research on this, who are reaching between 40 and 50 and having great regret about having swallowed this kind of lie, really, that that fulfillment in life comes only from career and only from kind of independence and travel and food and success. And they reach a point in their life where they can't turn back and say, oh, I wish I hadn't believed that. I wish I had had a baby when I had the chance. So from that perspective as well, I think opening up those conversations and exposing the reality of what that looks like at 40 and at 50, I think that gives younger people, I think anecdotally I see from Stephen's work, that is quite a striking thought for young people who have never thought about this in that way before. Or what will I feel when I get to that age? Is this a choice that I want to make for my fertility? Now there's a conversation for the rest of my life. When I'm in this particular mode where I'm going out partying and I have a great social life, what will I feel like when I don't have kids and grandkids when I'm older to to socialize with? Basically, so I think like that has been definitely very revealing about the lack of knowledge about the state that we're in and how much society has to catch up to realize the direction that we're heading and to change tact. In Scotland, our government have noticed this, and they've actually started. They've committed to encouraging IVF services, and they've been very promotional of encouraging young women to donate their eggs, even from university, to try and I've actually been targeted myself with these adverts to encourage me to donate my eggs, and many women, even from the age of 18, have also encouraged to do that. So they're really taking quite desperate measures. Now that is the wrong approach. We should not be asking young women to sacrifice their bodies, their health, their future connection with their children in order to encourage our birth rates. And I worry about countries who are taking this tact, like my own, rather than taking the much kinder approach to saying to a woman, look, if you look ahead to the next 15 years, think about what you want when you get older. Why don't you take those steps earlier on to be settling, to be planning ahead, and to be growing your family whilst you can do so naturally. So I think that has been a rude awakening for many of us in the UK, and I believe further afield.
Yeah, and I think women choose their husbands, don't you think? Largely, I think women choose their husbands, and so it is up to us to find husbands, and it's up to us to decide we want children. And that's a great challenge. That's a great challenge to think that it is up to us to find a husband and to have children. Why not? No, why not take that as a challenge?
Well, I think also it's part of it is this biological asymmetry that it comes back to. Men, the fertility clock for men is pretty indefinite. You can have a baby pretty much any age as a man. Whereas for women, your fertility starts declining sort of early 30s, and then in the mid 30s, it rapidly declines. By the end of the 30s, it's really low. And this creates an imbalance where, especially in a culture that has told men and women, you don't really need to rush, you don't need to have any responsibility, take your time, be yourself. That's fine for men. They can take as much time as they want, and so they can mess around women, they can do whatever they want. Whereas the woman is really on limited time in a way that the man is not. And so what you find is that even when there are women who, maybe in the early 20s say, I do want to find a husband and I'd like to settle down and I'd like to have kids early while I have the time and while my body's capable of that. It's much harder to find that in a culture where the men are, they've been told that it's just a free for all and they don't have to do anything in any particular time. They don't have to respect the woman. And so I think a lot of it is down to getting the relationship between men and women right, which is, as you know, one of the most broken things about our society.
Yes, right. Yeah. I think, with getting it, if we got the relationship right between men and women, who knows what else would go right.
Right.
Maybe everything. Who knows? Right? Who knows? Well, that's what the Bible's said on, isn't it? First there was Adam and Eve, and so
I know. It is very interesting.
Plays out from there.
Right. I mean, to trace that relationship between men and women from Genesis, where, you know, the fall of the curse was that woman would want to overcome her husband, you know, to rule over him in some translations. And that really has translated through the ages as to what has dominated the tension in the relationship between men and women, that desire for females to overcome a man. And I think it'd be interesting to trace throughout history. I'd love to write a book on this one day. Now I'm giving away my secrets, but I'd love to trace that relationship between men and women all throughout, from biblical times, throughout history, through the sexual revolution. Then we talked about already when women were told we're not different, we are the same as. And then now, in our day and age today, when we're saying we're not only the same as, but we are, we are men or we are women, just depending on what we would like to be. So that diminish the desire to kind of overcome what a man is and to be so different to a woman has really diminished the beauty of femininity and what blessings that we had in our own distinct way.
So women, Eve hearkened to the serpent who said, you know, really you can do anything. And you can be anyone, you can do anything. And she said yes to that. And Adam said, I'll help you do that. And those were their two first mistakes they made. So they got cast out because of those two thoughts. He thought he could do anything to help her do what she wanted to do. And she thought she could incorporate everything. Everything, really, even the snake.
Yeah, that's a good point.
And then they got cast out. That's when they got cast out, and they've been climbing there. And then the rest of the Bible is in all the ways that God would like to help us, and in all the other ways that we fall short, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah, Jordan's new book, "We Who Wrestle with God," he explains all of those stories. It's been really fun. We've been traveling all over the States, and he's gone through the book once. The first book that he's going to publish, he's gone through it once. So it was very illuminating.
Wow.
And we're going to put those YouTube videos up at some point.
I can't wait to hear
about it. And the book isn't even out yet. So everybody will know what at least the story is before they read the book. We'll make it easier to read.
Indeed.
Right?
A sneak preview. Yeah. Well, they may have read the Bible and then they'll know the story anyway.
Yeah. Very, very interesting.
Yeah, I can't wait to read that.
So was there any point in this debate that you've been involved in, the censorship and the abortion debate? Was there anything that you guys faced that you've had to overcome in order to carry on?
I think so. I mean, you know, I talked earlier about the censorship we have in academia, which is rampant. And this is to the point.
How is that gone? Are you still working at the university, though, I imagine, are you?
Yeah, although, you know, there's frequent efforts to change that. I think, and, you know, plenty of people complain to the medical regulators as well to try and get me struck off the medical register, things like that. So it's constant, but it's, you know, people often ask.
How have you fought against it and managed to survive? How have you done that?
I think you have to not take yourself too seriously. I think you have to have a bit of humor about it. I think if you go through life just sort of angry or resentful at the people who hate you, then you're going to turn into them. And so I think, you know, I make mistakes. I'm not the best person. I don't always articulate myself very well, but I'm trying to do the right thing. And sometimes I'm a bit of a jackass, but I'm a jackass that's trying to do the right thing. So what I tell people, you know, a lot of young people ask this question of, you know, is your career jeopardized by this? Do you think you'll be held back? Do you think your opportunities will be limited? And the answer is, obviously, of course, but it's the best thing I've ever done, and I wouldn't change it for the world. And, you know, I think it must just be such a vacuous life where you know what the right thing is and you're staying quiet or you're telling lies in order to keep the charade going. I just think that's so utterly sad that I can't imagine living that way. And I think I would be miserable. And so I say, yeah, you're going to have challenges. You're going to have people that hate you. You're going to have maybe really significant challenges, maybe physical threats to your life, or losing your career or something like this. And, you know, I run on that adrenaline. I think we need, I know that I'm doing the right thing, and I don't always do it perfectly. I make mistakes. I'm certainly a sinner, but I know that this is the right cause, and that it gives me incredible joy, even in those difficult times, to know that this is the right thing, that we're making a difference, we're saving lives, and that there are going to be kids out there and women out there who are forever grateful that we gave them the world because of what we did. And so if someone wants to ruin my life or take my life, at least I've contributed that life to other people. And so I have no regrets at all. So I'm very happy doing this.
What about you, Lois? Do you have anything to say about that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I very deliberately went into this fight, so I feel like I can never complain about facing any kind of adversity or challenge to what I do. I very much chose that. We have supported people across the world who've ended up in court battles by not entering it by their own fault. So I feel very much that I chose this path. It's not always an easy one. I remember that most distinctly. I remember at the time that Roe v. Wade was overturned, I had the privilege of going on the BBC to discuss that happening, and I also, it happened to be at the same time that Scotland was debating bringing in these buffer zones that we talked about to censor any help, any prayer outside abortion facilities. So I was on BBC Scotland to discuss that. I was invited on as part of a balanced kind of discussion. There was a member of the Scottish Parliament on with me. However, the next day, I thought it had gone just fine. Next day, I was sent a clip from Westminster to hear that a member of our Scottish government, our ruling party, the SNP, had stood up in the UK Parliament to ask why extremists like me were being allowed to be platformed on the BBC, and I should never be allowed to be speaking out like this. And it was quite shocking. I just hadn't realised quite that my words would be so offensive to people in so much power. So I suppose it was a compliment in a sense. But I guess it did kind of bring home to me the fact that although nothing particularly bad happened as a consequence, there was a bit of a Twitter storm, and we all got a bit of a fright. But it did bring home to me the consequence of one day it could be a little bit more serious. On the 1st of April, actually, just in the upcoming weeks, the Scottish Government will bring in a hate crime law, which will be make it very, very difficult to have open conversations in Scotland. There's a similar one lined up in Ireland. We at ADF International have been tracking these all over the world, in Finland and Mexico, all essentially the same thing, all essentially modern day blasphemy laws, punishing those who are kind of heretics against whatever the kind of social orthodoxy or sexual orthodoxy is of the day. And so my country's bringing that in on the 1st of April. It's very concerning. It would put people in prison for up to 7 years if they were to say something that's deemed to be stirring up hate, which we don't really know what that means, what's going to be defined as hatred in those contexts. So I am aware that there could be a situation one day where we are in serious trouble for expressing what we believe, whether that's about that women and babies deserve better than abortion, whether that's about that no child has ever been born in the wrong body, or any of these other essential truths that need to be heard in society. But it won't be the first time in history that Christian beliefs have not been legally expressed. It won't be the first time that Christians have been punished or persecuted for speaking out about truth. So we shouldn't be afraid. We're told not to be afraid. And ultimately, sometimes that is the greatest platform for truth after all. We had our client Päivi Räsänen in Finland. I don't know if you've heard her story, but she as a grandmother and a long-standing parliamentarian, she tweeted in 2019, she tweeted a Bible verse, and she challenged her own church as to whether they really should have sponsored the Pride Parade. She felt that this was maybe not the right decision for her church to take. And as a consequence of that tweet, she was on criminal trial. She's been through 2 rounds, the first court of appeal, and now she's been appealed to the Supreme Court on charges related to hate speech. The charges carry a potential prison sentence of up to 2 years. So she had really faced kind of the consequence of what we're speaking about here in terms of Christian censorship in the West. But her platform, because of that, has allowed her to communicate the Christian gospel across the world. And many people have written to her saying, I used to think that all Christians were bigots, but then I heard you talk about your story and I learned more about the Bible, and I've come to discover it for myself. She's heard that from many, many people from the LGBT community as well, who were the ones who would have been deemed to have been offended by her Bible verse tweets. So we can be encouraged, I think, that when these things happen, when these storms occur, it might actually be an opportunity to be able to spread that message of truth and hope, and somebody just might hear it that needs to hear it. So yeah, I think we should not be afraid.
Well, do you have anything last to say? I think that was a very good last question. I thought that was a very good last question. I don't know what you think, but I thought that was very good.
Don't feel closing remark.
Do you have anything else to say?
Well, I think, I came at this originally as a pro-choice person. 95% of our country is pro-choice. That's what I grew up with.
How much? 90?
95%.
95%.
So it's a tiny minority, and I was in the majority when I went to medical school, and I chose to join the minorities, which might be politically strategic in some cases, but not in this case. I think it's often a position that's not even heard and not even considered. It's easy to just say, pro-choicers are bigoted, they want to control women, all these sort of talking points. And for me, it was really just hearing our side out that let me change my mind. And so I'm sure, listeners of your podcast are generally open-minded people, and people who understand censorship well and are open-minded. But I guess, some of them might be pro-choice, and they might think it's obvious that we shouldn't, control women or force them to give birth, or however they want to phrase it. And I think all I'd say is just look at the arguments a bit more, have an open mind, ask your friends what they think. You might be surprised some of them are pro-life. And I really think if we go back to human equality, the fundamental question is this: who counts as a human being? Does it matter how intelligent they are, how big they are, how old they are, how independent they are? Is that ever something that we base people's worth on? Do we base anyone else's worth on how independent they are, how big they are, how developed they are? And the answer is no. And therefore, this is not about controlling women. This is not about religion. This is just about human equality and who counts. And I think if we look at the scientific consensus, then we have to accept it, whether that makes us popular or not. And so I'd encourage people listening to do the same.
Thank you guys very much. Much appreciated. Nice to meet you.
And
good luck with your new life together.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tammy. We loved being able to speak to you.
Oh, me too.